Hello, my name is Nick Norbrook. You are listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that gets behind the news from the continent, brought to you by the Africa Report. Are you bored of wall-to-wall corona coverage? Head to theafricareport.com for all our non-virus related political analysis, business reporting and comment. Fair warning, there is a lot of COVID coverage too. But today on the podcast, we try to imagine the world beyond the coronavirus in a webinar held in partnership with Invest Africa, the investment platform for the continent. My guest believes that the missing ingredient on the continent is good leadership. But rather than stay at this perhaps easy conclusion, Fred Swaniker has actually done something about it, launching, among other things, the African Leadership Academy, which aims to develop the next generation of African leaders. We try to talk through some of the new directions that the continent will have to take after the worst of the pandemic has passed, what it will really take to connect African producers to markets around the world using e-commerce, for example, and whether entrepreneurship is really a thing that can be taught at all. The great Indian novelist Arundhati Roy has spoken about the pandemic that we're all living through as a portal, about how it can give us an opportunity to step through into new ways of operating, imagining a new future. I can't think of a better person than Fred Swaniker of the African Leadership Group to help us try to attempt this reimagining for Africa. And before you all think that I've been cooped up in a house too long with all this talk of the imagination, let me reassure you, we'll be talking about the brass tacks of development, industry, skills, structural reform. Fred, let's talk about the pandemic as possibility, but first, perhaps you could just unpack for us what the African Leadership Group does.
Certainly. Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Nicholas, for chairing this session. By way of context, the African Leadership Group is an ecosystem of institutions that I co-founded and have been leading over the last 15 years. Our mission is to unlock Africa's human potential, which we believe is the greatest source of wealth creation in Africa. And specifically, we have a goal of developing 3 million leaders for Africa by 2035. So we have built a set of institutions. We have the African Leadership Academy in South Africa, the African Leadership University, which has campuses in Mauritius and Rwanda, and a business school. We also launched a leadership accelerator called ALX. We have a business school, and we also have the African Leadership Network. But all of these institutions have one thing in common. They select exceptional people, high potential, high performing talent. They develop them, and then we connect them to opportunities. So that's our model. We select top talent, develop it, and then connect it to opportunities to be able to transform Africa and solve our biggest problems.
So we're living now in a new era. Oil, other commodity prices are on the floor. They're not going to recover anytime soon. Demand from Asia, demand from Europe, demand from the US has all been blunted. Again, probably not coming back soon. So governments in Africa and private sector operators in Africa need to react. What might they do?
One of the things I believe, Nicholas, is that constraints drive innovation. And, so while there are many disadvantages of the current moment, and of course there's, we have a global recession that we're facing, and lives are being lost due to the pandemic, the constraints that it's creating is going to force us to think differently. We have to do things differently and not just go with the status quo, which is fantastic for innovation. When you think about how Africa has been developing over the last few decades, I believe that we have been lazy as a continent. As a continent that is blessed with gold and oil and so many other natural resources, we have forgotten that the real driver of economic development is not resources, it's human capital. And what do I mean by human capital? I mean the sum total of the skills, knowledge, and experience that a society possesses, right? This is really what has powered societies like Singapore and South Korea and Japan, all of these societies that didn't have the resource that Africa has. But what they had is they developed their people, they used their ingenuity to create products and services that the rest of the world could buy at several multiples of the cost of producing them. And that's how wealth was created. So if we want to get wealthy in Africa, we need to move beyond just exporting our raw materials, our cocoa, our gold, our diamonds, and we need to think about how do we use our brains to add value to these products and sell them at 10 times what it costs us. That's how we're going to get wealthy in Africa. And we have been missing this point because we have had the luxury of high oil prices, etc. So one of the things that I believe this moment is doing is going to force African governments to realize that if they want to balance their books, if they want to grow their GDP and be able to pay for all the services that they need to provide to their citizens, they need to allow to develop their people and let the people use their ingenuity to create new products and services and companies. And that's how wealth is going to be created. That's how governments will get their tax revenue to be able to deliver value to society. So this is one of the things that I believe is an exciting moment, and I hope that we don't squander it as a continent, because this is really the only long-term path to development.
And obviously, you talk about the big challenges of industrialization and adding value to commodities, but there are now increasingly in the global economy opportunities for workers in not just the industrial sector but also the service sector as well. We are all talking now on a webinar platform. I think employers globally are discovering that it is possible to get teams to collaborate around the world. What do you think that creates in terms of opportunities for African countries, African employers who might be wanting to tap into employment opportunities globally?
One of the challenges we've had as a continent is what to do with our youth. Africa has the youngest population in the world. The average age of an African is 19 compared to the average age in Germany or Japan of 47. And we will soon have a workforce larger than China and larger than India by 2035 as a continent. So we need to create jobs for 1 billion people by 2035. And that has, historically been one of the most baffling conundrums that we're faced as a continent. How are we going to create jobs for these people? Now, of course, there are many jobs that we need to create on the continent. And, historically, we've been looking at demand for employment on the continent and, entrepreneurship, etc., that we need to create jobs and government policies that will create jobs on the continent. But one exciting opportunity that the COVID era is creating is that it is forcing companies all around the world to work remotely. All of a sudden, overnight, 50% of the world or whatever is working, at home and remotely. And so companies have realized that, actually, we can get a lot done with remote talent. And with that, I believe that if we are able to upskill African talent and really look at this young population that we have as an asset that the rest of the world doesn't have, we can actually begin to place some of the talent that we're developing in Africa in global jobs, in global roles. So you can imagine an engineer from Kenya that is working for Siemens in Germany, but they're working remotely and they don't have to deal with all the hassles of work permits and xenophobia. I mean, we've seen a lot of people trying to migrate from Africa and risking their lives to get better opportunities in Europe and the USA, etc. Now they don't have to leave. If we can upskill them, they can work remotely and get higher salaries working. Facebook and Google are paying, for example, a fresh college graduate about $100,000 to $150,000 as a software engineer or data scientist. can we not produce 100,000 engineers, data scientists in Africa who would be happy to earn $10,000 a year, and they can work remotely? So, what about, could we get a designer in Nigeria to work remotely for Zara or H&M in Europe and not have to leave where they work? So I think that this is a fantastic opportunity for us, but we have to develop world-class knowledge workers who are able to compete globally in these fields that can be done remotely, and that way we can create a whole new pool of employment, and much higher earning employment, which again can help to grow our economies, but without the brain drain and without all of the hassles of immigration and xenophobia, etc., that comes when people leave Africa and go and try and seek opportunities elsewhere. So this is the moment, but again, we have to do things differently if we're going to be able to capture this opportunity.
Now, there's some very necessary preconditions to making that work, and we'll talk about the infrastructure challenge in a moment. But I just want to stay on this idea of training engineers, for example, to be hired by Silicon Valley, but living in Lagos. And I think there are companies like Andela who are already working on this. But it is a hard problem, isn't it? Because I mean, my numbers I'm sure are out of date, but I think on the continent, on average, there are roughly 30 engineers per million population, whereas in Brazil it's 700, and in the United States it's 6,000 or 7,000 per million population. How and this is a hard problem, isn't it? How do you make another 100,000 engineers in Nigeria?
Well, firstly, let me clarify that we don't need to be looking only at the highest skilled jobs being done remotely, because what companies are finding is that so many jobs that people didn't realize could be done remotely are now being done remotely. We've been forced to think differently. So you can have an executive assistant who sits somewhere else. You can have a designer who sits somewhere else, not a technology designer, not a UX designer, but just someone who does fashion design, right? You can have the office receptionist sitting somewhere else. So all of these roles that before were done in person, we're all having to work remotely. My entire company of 90 people, we're all working remotely, and we've actually been able to be more productive in many ways in the last 7 weeks than when we were working in person. So many companies around the world are realizing this. And so it's not only the most sophisticated, roles that requires extensive training, etc., that will be done remotely. With technology today, many roles can be done remotely, and it means upskilling African talent to be able to use things like Zoom, to know etiquette of how to interview for remote jobs. How do you manage your own work without having a manager watching over you every day? And it's about reskilling people to be able to capture this global employment and to keep the global employment. But it's also about building brands and relationships and networks. Research shows that 85% of jobs are filled by 80% of jobs are filled by word of mouth, and 75% of jobs are never even advertised. So social capital matters immensely. Who matters. So we need to, as a continent, build relationships with global organizations and let them know that actually there's a massive store of untapped talent sitting in Africa. Can we have banking and insurance? There's so many careers. It's not just software engineering. So I think I just want to make sure that we understand the full plethora of opportunities. Knowledge work in general can be done increasingly remotely. But that being said, even when for the more sophisticated things like data scientists, software engineers, etc., there are ways to rapidly skill people, and today technology also allows that to happen. To where within a matter of months or years, people can learn skills to be able to access employment globally. Education used to be about acquisition of facts and figures. and that's because we lived in a world where knowledge and information was scarce. So if